The New York Times on June 12, 1930, reported the after-effects of the Pinthis disaster. Quote, "Less than 200 yards east of the buoy, the sea this afternoon was a seething flame, fed by the tanker's 10,000 gallons of oil which continually oozes to the surface. Over an area of 2 miles, the rolling waves are alive with oil which has not yet ignited. Only the whistling boy stood guard during 2 hours a day when a lobster boat, hired by newspapermen, circled the blazing area which offers a serious menace to coastwise shipping, still hidden as it is in fog. Not a single Coast Guard boat was near the flames, which undoubtedly will burn until all of the tanker's cargo reaches the surface."
Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. Would you happen to have the story? The Pinthis in a Sea of Flames.
Here we are. Enjoy!
The Pinthis, the vessel that was feeding the fire, that was lighting up the area off the shore of Scituate, Massachusetts. The Pinthis was a steel-hulled 1,111-ton tanker vessel, originally built in 1919. She and her sister ship, the Bayonne, were both diesel-engine screw ships, built for the Sugar Products Company of New York to carry molasses along the east coast of the United States. By 1930, her ownership had changed to the Lake Tankers Corporation of Fall River, a subsidiary of the Mallory Lines. Her cargo had also changed. Molasses had been replaced with cargoes of high-octane gasoline. As she departed from Fall River for Boston, her tanks filled with 504,000 gallons. She was traveling under the command of Captain Arthur Jones with a crew of 17 under his command. All but 2 of them were from either New Bedford or Fall River. The Pinthis was soon enveloped in a thick fog, which had settled across the entire region. It was later found by divers that her speed had been set to half speed, and she was traveling at either 6 or 7 knots. Traveling from Boston to Norfolk and Baltimore, another vessel had found herself enveloped in the same fog as she departed from Boston and crossed Massachusetts Bay the afternoon of June 10th, 1930. The Fairfax, too, had reduced her speed to 6 knots. Her fog whistle was kept blowing continuously. She was traveling under the command of Captain Archibald Brooks, with a crew of 80 and 76 passengers, in addition to the general cargo. Among the passengers on board was Mr. McNeil, Vice President of the Merchants and Miners Transportation Company, owners of the 5,949-ton Fairfax. At 6:57 p.m., a little less than 2 hours from their departure from Boston and off the coast of Scituate, Massachusetts, the fog was still thick around them when both Captain Brooks and lookout Joseph Bright heard the sound of a ship's whistle a half point off the starboard beam. The 2 men heard the sound at the same time, the only whistle either man had heard. Bright turned and shouted a warning to the ship's bridge. Bright watched as the Pinthis, at the time unidentified, began to emerge from the fog. 2 masts were visible, and then a man standing on her bridge. Captain Brooks quickly gave the order to reverse the engines full speed astern. In the engine room, the order was obeyed instantly, but the ship's momentum would not be instantly stopped. The Fairfax vibrated with a sudden change, but was still traveling forward, with their speed slowed to about 3 knots. The 2 ships struck, and then there was an explosion. Flaming oil shot into the air, hitting the Fairfax, which was still stuck in the tanker vessel for a few minutes, and setting her and the Pinthis on fire. Captain Brooks gave the order to the assistant wireless operator to tell the chief operator to send an SOS. The sea around them was soon also filled with blazing oil, which was spewing from the tanks of the Pinthis. After a couple of minutes of being lodged in the side of the Pinthis, the Fairfax reversed and pulled out of the hole, allowing the Pinthis to fill with water and sink. She took her entire crew with her. Captain Brooks would later state that he had not been completely free of the Pinthis until she sank, delaying their ability to fight the fire, since the other ship was continuously feeding the blaze. The oil continued to bubble to the surface, filling the water and fueling a fire that was blazing around them as well as on board their ship. After they were clear of the Pinthis, Captain Brooks ordered the ship to travel at full speed and maneuvered to keep the wind on the starboard side to keep the fire from spreading. Though the Fairfax had struck on her starboard side, the entire port side of the Fairfax was in flames. Tragically, many passengers had been standing on the port side of the vessel, trying to see the lights that would mark the Cape Cod Canal when the disaster struck. 14 members of the crew and 11 of the passengers, including a couple with a 2-year-old child, finding themselves in the midst of an explosion followed by flames, jumped into the ocean hoping it would offer escape, only to find that it too was on fire. Only 2 of these people, 2 members of the crew, would survive, swimming underwater until it felt like their lungs would burst and came up next to a burning lifeboat. They were able to put the lifeboat out and were picked up after a few hours by a fishing vessel. All of the lifeboats on the Fairfax were made of steel, so it is possible this lifeboat came from the Pinthis. The finding of one of the lifeboats from the Pinthis was how the identity of the ship that had sunk was confirmed. None of the other people who jumped into the flaming water survived. One woman had been about to join those who leapt overboard when one of the ship's waiters had grabbed hold of her and stopped her. They were both hospitalized with burns later, but they both survived. In the flames and the confusion, the officers of the Fairfax were quick to try to restore order. Captain Brooks would later praise his crew as being some of the coolest men he had ever encountered. They went to their fire stations and began to fight the fire while life belts were distributed to the passengers, and the female stewards went among the passengers to give what aid they were able to. The ship's boats were out of the option, even though their steel construction meant they were still usable with the ocean ablaze. Captain Brooks considered it not to be an option at that moment. The crew did board some of the passengers into the lifeboats, and half-lowered them just in case they were forced to risk it at some point if they could not extinguish the fire. Among the passengers were many people connected to the Navy and the Marines bound for Norfolk, and these passengers would distinguish themselves by offering what aid they could. For one of them, it cost him his life. Navy sailor Walker had been helping women down from a burning upper deck when they were trapped to the deck below when he lost his footing, and both he and the woman fell into the flaming water below, despite several people trying to catch hold of them. Sergeant Kip of the Marines made sure to credit the nurses on board as having been as good as Marines any day when he spoke to the papers. The nurses, who had been traveling on board as passengers, joined in to help one of the stewardesses and the ship's nurse in offering medical care the best they could, with a complete disregard for their own safety. There were no medical supplies on board the Fairfax, so the ship's nurse, Dorothy Mannix, and Ruth Brown, one of the stewardesses, raided the galley and dining room for all the lard and olive oil they could find to use as burn care. The group offering medical aid was credited with having saved many lives with their emergency aid. Now, with the flames under control, the crew on the Fairfax was able to think of the people who had jumped into the sea and the crew of the Pinthis. They used their spotlight to try to search for anyone, and when that brought no results, they put 7 of the crew under the command of the first mate and dispatched them in a boat to search for survivors. They came back empty-handed. All was not well in the wireless room. Radio man Gwecken, an employee of the Radio Corporation of America and assigned to the Fairfax as chief wireless operator, was on duty when the collision happened. Having received orders from Captain Brooks to send out a general SOS, Gwecken would later say that he had typed out 7 or 8, though he could not say if he had successfully sent the SOS to all stations because he had never sent one before. They were never received by anyone. The flames and heat had caused the antenna to fall. The failure of the antenna was observed by Navy sailor Frederick Jam and Marine Arthur Salner, who had been helping with the lifeboats. They went and got Gwecken and informed him that the antenna was down. The 2 men then got to work helping to restore the antenna so messages could be sent out. It was a task that took half an hour, during which time the fire on the Fairfax was becoming subdued. Gwecken then made a decision that would be criticized by almost everyone. He decided to use his own discretion and not send out a general SOS again. He instead sent a coded message to both the ship owners and to Gloucester, another ship of the Merchants and Miners shipping line, which was running behind schedule and should be close by, requesting aid. Several hours after the collision had occurred, the Gloucester came alongside the Fairfax and began removing passengers and the injured via a gangplank between the 2 ships. The Fairfax had traveled far enough that her lee side was now free of any flames, allowing the Gloucester to approach her without danger. Captain Brooks and the uninjured crew remained on board the Fairfax, which was still able to travel under her own power. Her journey would be much slower than the Gloucester, though, due to a 10-foot hole in her bow, and there were many people with injuries severe enough that they needed to reach a hospital as quickly as possible. Despite the coded company messages about what had occurred, it did not take long for the papers to find out, as on reaching Boston, passengers and crew from the Fairfax were divided between Carney Hospital for treatment and Hotel Essex. Some of those who were brought to the hospital would succumb to their injuries over the next couple of days, adding to the toll of the disaster. All of the passengers and crew who spoke to the press described the horrors that they had witnessed and the chaos of the night before. But the passengers seemed divided on how they felt the crew and officers of the Fairfax had handled things. Some of the passengers, especially the men of the Navy and Marines, had nothing but praise for the captain and the crew, and how calmly they had behaved. Some of the other passengers complained that they had not seen the crew or the officers for an hour after the collision, giving them a deep sense of discomfort and anxiety. One woman said that she had voiced her displeasure that the captain had not walked among the passengers and reassured them after the collision loudly enough that he had been able to hear her, only to have him walk away without speaking with her. At least part of the passengers' perceptions of events was admitted by New York Times in their story about the disaster to have been a result of the hysteria of the situation. For example, some passengers complained that a member of the crew had charged them with an axe when they were in a lifeboat, only for an officer to clarify that the launching mechanism had jammed and the boat had to be cut free. The Federal Steamboat Inspector of Boston, Captain Lyons, had harsh words to say the night that the Fairfax arrived at her pier. He boarded her the night of her arrival, did some quick interviews without a formal inquiry, and voiced to the papers that he felt that the men of the Fairfax had been gambling with lives out there, and they were responsible for the loss of life that had occurred. The Merchants and Miners line immediately protested his statement. He had not done a complete investigation, and some of the things he said were simply incorrect. He claimed they had not searched for survivors. They had. He also claimed that Vice President McNeil took command of the situation after the accident, which he did not. Vice President McNeil stated that he had left Captain Brooks and his men to do what needed to be done, and the fact that the fire had been promptly put out spoke to Captain Brooks and his men being in complete control over the situation. The Assistant Fire Chief of Boston chimed in, stating that having seen the fire damage to the Fairfax, only, quote, perfect or almost perfect discipline could have saved her from burning to the water's edge. At the inquiry, Captain Brooks was confronted primarily on the subject of the SOS messages. Captain Brooks was quick to state that he had given the order to send out SOS messages, and then had been occupied in fighting the fire. He had not known that the wireless operator had decided to use his discretion after the antenna was repaired to not send out another general SOS, and instead contact the company. Those same questions were asked of the wireless operator, who turned pink with the confrontation, and did not answer particularly satisfactorily. He had not even recorded the initial SOS signals in his log, stating that he had intended to do so later, something that had been held against Captain Brooks when he was accused of not having sent out an SOS at all. Captain Brooks did have a response to the question about why they had not reached out to the nearby Coast Guard. However, the answer was that he did not feel that it would be possible for the Coast Guard to reach them in the sea of flames, and therefore they had not considered it a matter of urgency. The Fairfax would be repaired and returned to service in early August. She needed extensive repairs to her cabins, electrical, lifeboats, promenade, and hurricane deck. She also required 6 shell plates to be replaced. The Fletcher plant in Hoboken won the bid by offering to do the task in 45 days and for less than anyone else. They completed the task in less time than they had predicted, something they were so proud of that they used it for marketing. While Captain Brooks was still on trial, and the public of Boston still mourned the loss of 47 people between the Fairfax and the Pinthis, United Dry Docks advertised, quote, 4 earning days saved for the SS Fairfax due to her early delivery. Captain Brooks would face trial by the Federal Board of Inspectors on 4 charges a few months later. The first charge was excessive speed in a fog. The second was violation of pilot rules. The third was unskillfulness, and the fourth was negligence. The trial started in Boston, but on finding that opinion was very strongly against him, and there was a doubt about a fair trial, the trial was transferred to Norfolk, Virginia. Here he was acquitted on all charges. Divers went down to the Pinthis and found that the vessel's engines were set to 7.5 knots, while the Fairfax had been traveling at 3 knots at the time of the collision. The Fairfax had also been using a fog whistle, whereas no one had heard more than a single blast from the Pinthis. It was decided the helm and engines on the Fairfax had been handled correctly, and that if Captain Brooks had done anything differently, both ships would have been lost, and it was possible the lives of everyone on board the Fairfax would also have been lost. For more information, please see the New York Times from June 13, 1930, or see our other sources in the description below. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.